2200, Chapter 2, Hawke. The old truck broke down a mile from the mark. The smell of thermal fuel filled the cab, a leak. The endless flatness on this side of the desert crumbled with pitted rocks. Dust swirled up and danced between dead grasses and crooked Joshuan trees in painful sunlight. Vast surges and clouds of red sand raced and rolled forward, burying everything in grit. It said that entire colonies had disappeared in storms like that, swallowed up by the desert. I'm not sure I believed that, but people go missing sometimes. They run into the desert, looking for food, freedom, or fantasy, but we find them days later, bodies dried out, swollen tongues and lips. I was lost in the desert once. I was young, too young to remember anything before, but I remember the hollow sound that filled my ears and the creak of dehydration in my body. After the colony found me, I went deaf for 3 days. We should have rewelded the fuel lines back at the market when we had the chance. Vern's words flowed with the sweet, mellifluous cadence of a southern drawl, each syllable rich with charm and hospitality. But behind that honeyed accent lay a razor-sharp mind and a quick wit, traits that had made him an excellent thief. He could spin tales that could beguile even the most vigilant mark, and his soothing voice was his most potent weapon. In the world of shadows, he was a legend, a man with an eye patch who defied expectations with his stocky build, southern charm, and unmatched thievery skills. A rogue with a heart of gold, a twinkle in his eye, and a knack for getting away with the impossible. We've been day driving for over 800 miles. They were going to crack either way. We'll find another way to bring the water back. I didn't have to tell Vern that, but he hadn't had to ask either. I spat the answer, showing my irritation. At 19, I was the youngest leader of the colony raiding teams, a mercenary who commanded respect and trust from a dozen soldiers. Like most around these parts, I was deeply tanned from a young age, an unavoidable part of the desert when the sun permeated everything. And, like any good soldier, I kept my long, dark hair pulled back in a tight bun to remove any chance for distraction from the wind. I liked it pulled back. I wanted everyone to see the scars. They didn't have to know that most of them had been delivered before I was 12 by the general himself. Not anyone would care. But what truly set me apart were my knees, a cybernetic augment that gave me speed and agility beyond any other, my golden ticket to unit leadership when the time came, and a reminder of my mistakes. They gleamed with silver and manuficular steel, the best material the brains and the biome could make. My knees had been shattered when Max died. A son, not mine, but of the woman I loved more than anything. And it was my fault that she was broken now. Think we'll find another truck before tomorrow's storm? Vern asked. I shrugged. 23 months ago, I retrofitted the truck's charging station with thermal fuel. It gave the engine quite a punch in open throttle. That mode had saved me more than a few times. The image of a skinny, tattooed girl riding shotgun as we outstripped a biome landship surfaced in my memory. The corner of my mouth lifted, then dropped as the round face of her little boy, bouncing wide-eyed in her lap, replaced it. But the sun was hot, thermal fuel was corrosive, and the old truck's days were done. The smell of fuel in the truck increased. We can't stay here. The sun might ignite the fuel and blow us sky high, Vern said. I glanced at the dash. 175. We won't make it 100 feet without cooking, I said. Smoke rose from underneath the hood, hazing up the landscape. I'd hoped the old girl would make one last trip, but she wasn't having it. I chanced a quick glance through the window screens. The sun hung large and low northwest of us. Half an hour until dark. We'll have to take our chances until then, I said. The blower was still blasting cold air, for the moment anyway. The thermal-treated windows kept the bulk of the heat out. We wouldn't cook inside the cab for whatever that was worth. Vern shrugged and scooted low in the seat, pulling his wide-brimmed hat down over his face and closed his eyes. I'll hunker down here then. The truck rattled, then squealed as metal ripped beneath us. Shit, I said, turning toward the back seats. Vern lifted his hat and jammed it onto the top of his head. I loosened the knot of the sun scarf at my throat and pulled it over my head in case I needed to make a quick tuck and roll. The cool air was already thinning, the oppressive heat forcing its way into the truck. It cut the coolant, I said, indicating the threat beneath us. 2 leaks. The fuel probably attracted the crab, Vern said. Yeah, the truck rumble had nothing to do with it, I said, side-eyeing him. No snake beast, so I doubt it. He ignored the jab. We were tired. The supply run had been a bust. Lucky us, I said. Vern rearranged, crouching in his seat. Together we watched the growing mound rising in the back seat's floorboard, A drop of sweat pushed from under my hairline and fell into my manute linen leathers. I heard a pop, followed by a whoosh of air, and felt the cool cabin air drain away, replaced with dry desert heat. The growing mound in the undercarriage now had a tiny hole in it and something red pushed through it. Vern climbed over the top of it into the cab's trunk. My eyes widened. "Vern," I said. He ignored me, pulling bags onto his back of food, meds, and scraps used for repairs to our colony's shelter. He struggled, clambering back to the front, and dropped an old canteen onto the floorboard. It clanged against the tip of a giant claw. It paused in its digging, then retracted and disappeared into a dark cavern beneath. A deafening crash echoed through the truck. I clapped my hands to my ears, felt a moment of weightlessness as the truck lifted into the air, and again as it fell, crashing back to the ground. Vern bounced around the cab. I fell across the front seats. Both of us scrambled frantically for something to hold on to. I grabbed the shooter strapped to my back with one hand and crouched in the driver's seat, gripping the door handle with the other. "Not in here," Vern yelled as I lifted the gun. "We'll blow for sure." I held the gun in my hands, feeling its shape and weight as the metal molded itself into my grip. It was a meter long and surprisingly lightweight, but its firing end was the size of my fist. Its shape tapered down to a skinny handle that fit my palm like a glove, the cool metal warming to the touch. The gun shot 3 manuficular plastic bullets at a time. Hardened with ore processing, they were perfect for incapacitating at a distance or ending someone up close. Cheap and efficient. Unless you came up against a crab monster. Their exoskeletons were iron hard and as impenetrable as the biome radiation shield, but the underbelly of the crab was soft as skin. Unfortunately, they were faster than they looked, so getting close enough to kill it before its razor-sharp claws tore you to pieces was a gamble. One I wasn't up for, unless absolutely necessary. And then the overwhelming wave of dread that signaled a panic attack began to build. I pressed my back against the unforgiving stability of the truck door. "Breathe." Taro's familiar, soothing voice played in my head. "Just breathe." But the hole in the floorboards sucked at the air, filling the cab with the stench of fuel, coolant, smoke, and dust. I felt choked, boxed in, trapped. I cradled the gun to my chest, shooter finger alongside, but not touching the trigger. I closed my eyes, concentrating on counting my breaths, and the truck faded away. I was sitting in the hot sand, my knees obliterated, the pain dizzying. His still small body, covered in blood, lay across my lap. My hands shook, and the slosh of footsteps running in sand and guards yelling instructions surrounded me. I gasped, and my eyes flew open. Burton jerked his head up from the ever-widening hole in the floorboards to squint at me. "I'm in the truck," I reminded myself. "I'm here, not there." "Stay with me, Hawke," Burton said bracingly, glancing between me and the crab monster, slowly peeling open the truck bottom. I nodded, attempted to swallow the panic, but my breath beat a fast, rough tempo. It had been a year, but the nightmares hadn't stopped. Panic came on suddenly, putting missions at risk more frequently as time had passed. Only Vern and Taro knew. If it got out, no one would leave the colony with me. To survive, you needed a calm, clear head, and I didn't have that. Not anymore, anyway. I pressed my lips together and pushed measured air through the small opening with intentionality. My heart slowed and my breathing steadied. The desert red claw had returned, squeezed through the growing hole in the floorboard, and grasped at bits of truck. It wasn't a crab, not like the ones that used to live in the ocean, but someone gave it the name and it stuck. It moved like a spider at an ambling pace, but the smaller ones were fast. Hundreds of eyes lined the angles of its dark geometric shape, flat sides and smooth plates that met in points. Its shell resembled desert boulders. At night, they blended black against the sandy red-brown of the landscape. Once, years ago, I watched a small one scoop up sand in its little claw. One of the sides fell open. It dumped the sand inside and snapped shut. It reminded me of a ship door dropping open to allow entry. All I needed was the squeal of metal hinges to make the image complete. The wrenching of metal brought me back to the truck. "Sorry, old girl," Vern breathed, patting the seat. "That was the thermal pipes," I said, glancing around at the dash. 168. Still too hot to bail. What the hell were we going to do? "We might not have a choice," Vern said, repositioning in the front seat with his bags, hand on the door handle. I nodded and stowed the shooter in the holster at my back. "Get ready," I said. "As close to 140 as we can get, or on ignition, we bail." Through the sweat-slicked hair matted across my face, I peeked at the dash again, impatient. 158, I said, straightening. That's fast, said Vern. I agreed, but it was too fast. With dread, I peered up at the sky, knowing what I'd see, and groaned. Clouds rolled in, breaking and reforming. Tails of lightning jumped between them. An electricity storm was rolling in ahead of schedule. Okay, Vern said. Do we want to be crab food, die of heat stroke, or volunteer to be lightning rods? The hole in the undercarriage took up the entire floor. The crab clamped onto the bench seat and tugged, inching it into the cavern beneath us. The hole was big, but the crab monster was bigger. It would take a few more minutes before it reached us. Except now I could make out more of the cavern opening beneath it. Tiny claws peeked around the giant crab's carapace. If they squeezed around, we'd have a whole new set of problems. A deafening crack, like a gunshot, rang out nearby. The darkening sky flickered, and my stomach dropped as something else came into view. Oh no, Vern said. He'd seen them too. The crabs weren't the only monsters we'd have to fight off tonight. Fist-sized Palo Verde beetles surrounded the truck, buzzing outside the windows. They had glossy bodies built for battle, and long legs and feelers that squirmed even in flight. An involuntary shudder ran through me, raising the hairs on my arms. I shook off the revulsion and reached for Vern, but he shook me off and brought an arm with a loud thwack onto the seat, letting out a throaty growl of exasperation. Now's as good a time as any to start shooting, don't you think? He asked. I shook my head. They'll just swarm. No point wasting ammo. We'll just have to try not to get bit. Palo Verde venom was a painful and fast-acting paralytic. All it took was a couple of bites, and the body would freeze up, and you'd be completely awake and aware as they made quick dinner of you. If they got us, it wouldn't matter if the crabs got through, or if the lightning struck, or if the heat overpowered us. We'd be done. So sure, no problem. Survive the crab monster, dodge poisonous flying beetles, and outrun electricity. Let's not forget to finish the mission so the 100 or so people counting on us from the colony don't die of dehydration. Why not? Why the fuck not? 148, I said. Almost there. I leaned into the hot glass, my feet still beneath me in the seat, ready to jump at the first sign of fire or cooler air. From the corner of my eye, I watched the crab monster as it wedged its way partly into the underside of the truck. Its large secondary claw stuck between its side and the truck, the creak of manu-steel pipes, shielding, and old-world iron groaning as they pulled apart. Behind me, the beetles knocked against the window. A crack appeared along the windshield, snaking up to the roof and down to the hood. I took a breath and clenched my jaw, glancing at Vern. Ready? He asked, pulling a refillable lighter from one of his pockets. The plan was simple. He didn't need to explain. If we were going to get out of here without the thing chasing us, we'd have to make sure it couldn't run. We had to cross a quarter mile to the refuel station, outrun the beetles and the lightning before the crab monster and the explosion ripped us apart. The sun was now past horizon and night was falling fast. The truck shook, and with a glance, I saw little claws reaching around the giant one. The crack in the windshield widened, and the grating buzz of the beetles doubled. Let's go, I said. As the temperature gauge ticked to 142, I tightened the sun scarf around my face. Vern jammed his hat down on his head. We kicked open the doors and dove from the truck, rolling on the sand. The last thing I caught before sand filled my nose was the thick smell of old world hide from the seats and the bite of the ignition key still inserted in the steering column. Vern landed beside me, rear down with a groan. I bounced up, ignoring the grate of rusted manu-titanium in my knees. Installed well past their shelf life, the second-hand parts had been tearing at my organics every day since, like the sound the truck made when her gears stuck, but the engine persisted. The heat outside hit with a blast of gritty wind. Sweat pooled in my boots, but heavy clouds hurried the darkness, and bloody twilight transformed it to inky blackness within minutes. Slowly, agonizingly, the air was cooling. I ran, dragging a huffing urn along with me by the front of his coat. My boots pushed against sliding pits of sand as I worked to propel myself forward. There was a particular way to run in the sand if you wanted to get anywhere, and it takes 1.6 times more energy to do it right. My knees adjusted automatically. Or they were supposed to. To be fair, they used to. When they were first installed, they functioned just fine. But wear and tear and the sand made them hard to maintain, and it had been months since my last calibration. Often, when I needed them to be at their best, they got stuck in calculation loops. Currently, they were stuck in just such a loop, and couldn't adjust for the unbalance of the sand. So, with Vern dragging along behind me, I'd looked like a frog with a limp, running on its back legs carrying another frog that preferred to bounce between its feet and belly as it ran. But hey, it was faster than an unaugmented run. And right now, that meant the difference between living and being eaten by flying beetles, torched by supercharged lightning, or blown up in our own crab truck bomb. I chanced to glance back at the truck. Vern had left the lighter on the seat to catch at the ripped cloth. The truck jerked to one side, then the other, and any second now. But then the many-winged beetle cloud obscured my view. I looked forward, leaned back, and willed my knees to adjust. The beetles batted against my head, arms, and back. A gust of wind pulled the scarf from my face, and I felt little legs settle and pull at the hair near my forehead. I flinched as they bit away chunks of the scarf, crab hide gloves, and jacket, and I heard a rip as they tore pieces from the treated manu-leather armor. I looked back to make sure Vern was still alive, but the bugs blocked my view, pulled and tore at me, and slowed me with their weight. Then the explosion. A screech of rending metal ripped through the air, and a hot shove at my back. The beetles were gone, and I was on the ground, Vern's shirt slipping from my fingers. I looked back at the truck, a crater in the distance. Vern was face down in the sand, and the crab monster was raining down where the truck used to be, its offspring pouring from the hole toward us, a wash of undulating, near black shells in the red sand. I popped up, ripped Vern from the ground, and shot forward. Finally, my knees had adjusted and stabilized. My peripheral display read 1.6% expenditure increase. I saw the refill station. It was just ahead. The dark was thick now. The wind thrashed and shoved. It blew sharp sand about in razor sheets, the little pricks finding every tiny opening in my careful layers. A bolt of electricity struck the ground at my feet. At last the lightning had arrived. I threw my arm up as the sand exploded in rock and glass, losing my grip on Vern. I hit the sand, head whipping back, connecting with the rock and debris. Dark spots winked in and out of existence. They threatened to grow, obscuring my vision. I rolled over in a daze, and Vern was there, helping me shakily to my feet, mouthing something too low to hear over the storm's rumbling groan. My knees ached as we stumbled toward the refill station. My head pounded in time with my strides. More lightning struck the ground to the west, revealing the leaning old-world building, reinforced with scaffolding. The refill station shifted with the wind. I sucked in another breath, coughing out the grit. It scorched my mouth, and my chest ached against the searing particles. And then I heard them, the twittering of the baby crabs as they approached. Louder than the storm, faster than us. We looked back in horror as they blanketed the ground behind us. It was too much. My knees jerked, their calculations jumping between analysis and adjustment. I fell forward, and they were on top of me. My gloved fingers closed around handfuls of hot sand as Vern fought the slipping of ground and the wind to pull me from them. I dug in, feeling it fill my sleeves, fall down my shirt, searing my skin everywhere it touched. I pulled my elbows under me and crawled forward, trying to escape, to breathe. Vern's hand slipped from mine, and he was gone. It was too late, too hot, and I was too tired. My head was heavy, mouth dry with sand. My eyes ached against the collecting particles. I forced them open again, focused on the pain to keep from passing out, and reached, dragging myself. My arms shot as I pushed against the heavy shells pressing me down, the snap of claws attempting to slice through the hide at my back. The refill station was less than 50 meters. I begged for another blast of lightning, anything to scatter them. Then the refill attendant stepped out, spread shooter lifted in my direction, Vern at his side. The attendant was raw-boned, head bald, white beard blowing around his face. He leaned into the weight of the gun. In the whipping wind of the storm, he wore only a baggy shirt and ripped pants. His shoes sunk deep into the sand where he stood. Though the sun was at rest now, the heat persisted, burning my exposed skin. A blast cut through the air, and the weight on my back lifted. I gasped, choking on cooked air, and pushed up from the sand, crying out in effort. Vern was at my side, dragging me forward. I heard the clack of the reload lever. The attendant and I made eye contact. His were wide, a pained line straightening his thin mouth. He nodded, and I dove for the sand again, pulling Vern with me as my skull reverberated with the bullets whizzing overhead. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the successive cracks and felt the crabshell shrapnel connect with my hide. "Come on," the attendant yelled, hoisting me up with one arm as Vern grabbed the other. I hauled up from the sand again, swayed for a moment as the desert tilted, and stumbled toward the refill station, ignoring the pain as I limped through its open door. The attendant slammed the door shut behind us, and it rattled against the storm, then stilled as he fell against it, panting. We stood for several seconds in the sudden quiet of the refill station, our heavy breathing an echo of the storm outside. Clean blue coloring tugged at my attention to one side of the empty shelves. Barrels labeled fresh water were grouped together against the wall. Now, if only he had a truck out back, we'd be golden. I pulled the sunscarf from my face. Thanks, I panted. Thank you, he said, taking a step toward me and leveling the shooter again. I get a bonus for bringing in fresh bodies. Vern whispered a curse behind me, and I lifted both arms in surrender. You gonna kill us? I said. Oh no, they like the bodies alive, better for their experiments. I doubted he had any idea what the biome bastards did with their outside captives, but I had no desire to witness whatever it was firsthand. I heard Vern suck in a breath through his teeth, a familiar signal. I pointed at the water with 3 fingers. That yours? The attendant shrugged. I dropped 1 finger to my palm, then 2 and 3. Vern lunged from behind me toward the barrels. The attendant jerked the shooter toward him. I pulled my gun from the holster at my back. The attendant and I looked at each other as he swung it back to me, a second too late. I leveled my arm, aimed at the furrow between his brows, and squeezed.